All right, welcome back to the program. We're on the home stretch now, as Laddie said, to talk corruption. And corruption is a key factor holding back Africa's development, and this notion is deeply embedded in the narrative of Africa's socio-economic development. Well, here in Nigeria, the present administration has opened a broad discourse on corruption with a number of arrests and cash recoveries as well. But there are not enough success stories showing a systematic fight against corruption. So let's take a look at this administration's efforts in this regard.
It's one of the tripod upon which the Buhari administration campaigned and stands on. Corruption in every facet of the country's life is endemic.
Corruption is an existential threat to Nigeria.
Its effect on the country's fortune is profound. Poverty, poor infrastructure, and insecurity are just a few. The president believes fighting corruption is a must. In 4 years, the leading anti-graft agencies have reported successes. Monies and property have been recovered, with some high-profile individuals put behind bars.
Our policy was to tackle anti-corruption, grand corruption, beg your pardon, first. That was our policy, to deal with grand corruption first. By this I mean the stealing of huge public resources directly from the treasury.
First and foremost,
opinions on the level of successes are divided.
In the last 4 years, we have had occasions of heavy recovery of humongous amounts of money, which has been invested in social programs.
First and foremost, you need to even have a legal framework on how to recover, how to manage the recovered, asset. Right now, as I speak to you, we did not have, legal framework on how to manage the recovered asset.
The rate of convictions is said to be hampered by the slow judicial processes. This has heightened the call for special tribunals for corrupt cases.
We solely support, special court to try corruption cases because we have not yet reformed our judicial sector.
We need the buy-in of the legal profession, bar and bench.
Yet, others worry about the methods being adopted and a proper record of recovered items.
We have a public procurement law in place which is not been actually complied with, and most of the corruption actually are done within the public procurement. We have corruption in the defense and security sector, which is also making our lives and our country vulnerable to insecurity.
The president set up an audit committee that has since submitted its report. The implementation of the Treasury single account is said to be largely effective, but with room for improvement. While some individuals have been made to account for resources under their care, there are agencies of government that have gone unaudited for years.
You cannot be fighting corruption when over 66 or 67 government agencies have not been audited in Nigeria, and yet every year they collect annual budgetary allocation.
Despite the gains we have made in closing the gates, we know that there is still much ground to cover to stop systematic corruption.
This is one of the shortcomings of the fight against corruption in view of many.
It's expected that it will now go down to the level of the states, to the level of local government, to the level of the private sector, in which values are going to be re-engineered.
On the positive side, there is increased awareness on the risks that come with corrupt acts. The impunity of the past may have been checked, but going forward, there is much work left to be done.
I will urge Mr. President to identify committed, patriotic, honest, experienced Nigerians to be appointed in different sectors. Because if you do that, they would be in tandem with his idea and with his principle of the fight against corruption.
Our next level is to create the environment for collaboration between our agencies, civil society, and other stakeholders.
All right, apologies for that little glitch. But generally, we've gotten the meat of what Ibrahim was trying to say there on anti-corruption. But I have a few more statistics for you on this anti-corruption discussion to do with the category of alleged corrupt persons that we have so far. Top on that list, politicians, senior military personnel, we have lawyers, judges, and company executives. Let's look at some of the financial crime convictions over the years. 103 in 2015, 125 in 2016, 137 convictions in 2017, and 315 in 2018. So just in case you were thinking about how many convictions over the years, that's for you. And looking at recoveries now, between January to March last year, that's 2018, we had 11.5 billion naira final forfeiture, 133.8 billion naira non-forfeiture recoveries, 8.92 billion naira direct deposits, 38.12 billion in terms of tax recoveries, 1.82 billion in subsidy recoveries, 42 billion naira from banks, third party. Pieces of jewelry, they've recovered gold and other things from assets from major government agencies. So jewelry as well, gold is on that list as well. And between January to March this year, these are the recoveries the EFCC have made: 140.7 million naira, 2.021 billion in direct deposits. There's a lot of money in Nigeria. 7.20 billion in tax recoveries, 3.06 billion in subsidy recoveries. Now, in terms of high-profile cases that the EFCC have prosecuted, we've seen last year in 2018, Jolly Inyame, former governor of Taraba State, Joshua Darie, senator and former governor of Plateau State, as well as Joseph Wobike, senior advocate of Nigeria, who has now been stripped of the highly revered title. He was convicted for perverting the course of justice. And these are just some of the cases that the EFCC are trying to show us. So for those of you who are saying you don't know what the figures are, what are they doing, this is an idea. But we're going to discuss it.
Yes, and one of those responsible for many of those convictions or participating in many of those convictions is with us in the studio here. He's a legal practitioner, as you would probably surmise. He is the present counsel to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. It's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Wahab Shitu. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sitting beside him is not a lawyer, he's a journalist. Before we start with the lawyers, Mr. Eddie Overe, of course, is well known as one of the foremost journalists in the print in Nigeria today, and he's presently with This Day. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The lady at the extreme end had been on the program earlier where she was asking the question and talking about a number of things, but she joins us now as chairperson of NAWOJ in Lagos, Hajia Temitope Sakina. Thank you so much for being with us. In our Abuja studios, we're being joined once again, as I told you earlier, by Mr. Femi Adesina, Senior Special Advisor to the President on Media and Publicity. Mr. Adesina, thanks for staying with us. And with him, Cynthia Mbamalo, Programs Manager, Yaga Africa. Thank you, Cynthia, for once again joining us. We last saw you during the elections. Now we're seeing you just before the inauguration. And sitting with them is Group Captain Emmanuel Iheanacho, retired Air Force officer and, of course, policy expert. Thank you very much, Captain Iheanacho, for joining us on this segment. As you can see, it's a full house. And that speaks to the importance of the topic and maybe the controversy. Let me start with you, Mr. Shitu. When the EFCC and ICPC were set up, the menace was definitely not this big. It seems to have grown in leaps and bounds since both agencies were set up. But there's a paradox in that, isn't there?
Yes.
Given the fact that the agencies were supposed to limit the growth of this. What do you think is responsible?
Well, what I think is responsible can be traced to the meaning of corruption itself, which is derived from the Latin verb corruptus, which is meaning a breakdown. So when you see, when you talk of corruption, you talk of it in terms of breakdown of systems, in terms of breakdown of institutions, in terms of breakdown of societal traditions, in terms of breakdown of ethical and moral behaviors, and finally, in terms of breakdown of personal behavior. So the elephant in the room is corruption. I've seen discussions around security, around economy, and
the elephant we called in the previous discussion was power supply. Yes.
Actually, the elephant in the room is not power that you suggested, with due respect. The actual elephant in the room is corruption. And what we need to do to be able to drive the growth and development is to tame this monster called corruption, which is at the heart of our problems. If you talk of the security challenges, breakdown, and the economic challenges that we have, at the heart of all of this is the menace called corruption. And that is why we need to commend the President Muhammadu Buhari's administration. Because the entire continent, the African Union, has even recognized and appointed President Buhari, Muhammadu Buhari, to drive the anti-corruption agenda of the continent. And this is not a mean achievement. Internationally, we have a situation where our president is recognized globally as not being corrupt. The Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, is also seen as not being corrupt.
But I'm sorry to cut in, but I think that may very well be the case outside the country.
Yes.
But within the country, some of the allegations border on the selective nature of the persecution, one, and then two, the fact that it appeared as if, even if you were gone after in the first instance, the minute you find your way into the favored grouping, the people tend to give you a soft landing, and so on. I mean, there's that perception.
That's the problem of perception.
Yes.
But that really overlooks major policy, trust that this administration has carried out. And if you permit me, I will reel out about 22 policy initiatives.
We don't have the time.
We don't have the time.
You don't have the time. But what I'm saying is that in terms of prosecution, in terms of recoveries, you have reeled out the figures. What this administration has achieved in the area of fighting and corruption is really, really unprecedented. And then the best way to win the argument, to look at the argument, is to look at the statistics. And that's what I attempted to do. You said there's no time. But I think what we should emphasize is that corruption is not something that can totally be banished from any country. I think we must appreciate that. What we can do is to put in place mechanisms to reduce it to the barest minimum. If you look at all the figures, Nigeria, the perception of Nigeria, the ranking of Nigeria in terms of anti-corruption is gradually reducing.
Okay, I'm going to
and that is because of the efforts
I'm going to
of
have
this
some
administration.
thoughts in there. I know you've praised the administration and all that, and we've heard that. But I'm going to come to you, Mr. Eddie, because being a journalist, the process is just as important as the outcome. So looking at what he has said now, we've reeled out figures and statistics. There is also that argument that the process through which they are arriving at these convictions is not quite what it should be. For instance, if you look at all the monies, we've talked about jewelry, gold, they've talked about how are they keeping these things, etc. What do you think? Are you as optimistic as he is?
Well, the first point to make is to admit that a lot of changes have been had and that it's not as it used to be. But we first must also admit that we are not there yet at all. Like you rightly said, the process is as important as the outcome. The first question, perhaps, is, all these monies so recovered, where are they? What has it translated to in the lives of,
dollars,
in foreign currency, all this jewelry you're talking about, huge, you talked about billions of naira. What has it translated to? Has it improved the life of ordinary Nigerian? No. Yes, we may have recovered. In fact, there was also an issue about the openness. There was a time that we didn't even have the figures, that we didn't know how much had been recovered. All these Ikoyi recovered. Where are all those monies? What has it been used for? So that anxiety is among Nigerians. That worry is among Nigerians. Yes, you may have recovered all those things, but in practical terms, what has it translated to in boosting either the economy, if, for instance, the money is looted from Abacha. Yes, the governors at the time said, oh, they should divide it among themselves. But I would have thought that the more improper thing, for instance, is to say, okay, we'll use it to execute XYZ project. We'll use it to do XYZ, so that 1 year, 10 years from now, we can point and say, yes, the monies recovered from Abacha, for instance, were used to execute this kind of project.
Mr. Shito, can you help us out? As in...
Well, you see, that's the concern expressed by my co-panelists is legitimate. But what I want to say is that concern overlooks the fact that there are legal, obstacles that are needed to be cleared before this money can actually be free for the kind of usage that you have described.
Where are they kept is the question.
Okay, the first question I want to say is that the money is safe.
It's safe, but where are they kept?
Kept in the CBN. Kept in the CBN. And now, what you will begin to see in the new administration is the increased usage of these funds, because most of these legal obstacles are now being cleared. So that the money belongs to you and I. It belongs to the people. It belongs to the Nigerian people.
But what would they do with it? What of the gold? What would they do with that? All the gold, the jewelry? They will sell it.
Of course, whatever can be done to convert those money for the benefit. But one thing that you can be certain of is that this is not a government that will steal Nigeria's money.
Let me put you on pause, Mr. Shitu, let me put you on pause and go to Abuja.
Yes.
Cynthia, the war against corruption has been controversial for the simple reason that people are questioning the methodology. None of those convicted can actually now legally claim that they are innocent. And from the figures, there are quite a number of those. There are quite a number of those who are going through the court processes as we speak as well. I remember the argument being given by one of the most prominent politicians that for as long as nobody is saying, I'm not a thief, the argument should not be, I'm not the only thief. Why come after me and leave other thieves? Between those two arguments, where exactly is justice and fairness?
Well, that's quite an interesting point you make, because the truth is, when it comes to the fight against corruption, one of the principles you want to uphold is the fact that, one, people seeing justice to have been done. And what we have is, while we have a lot of effort in the fight against corruption, and if you look at the pillars as established by the National Anti-Corruption Strategy that talks about beyond preventing corruption, but also enforcement and sanctions, the question rather is, if perception, if the people view a fight as being lopsided, they would never really appreciate the effort invested in the fight against corruption. And that is where we have the challenge, the fact that there's really that existing perception. And whether we like it or not, what people perceive is what informs their decision and the ways they take action. So now what we want to look out for is beyond just the conviction, is looking at the very obvious cases of corruption and how the government deploys its agencies to fight and ensure that there is enforcement and that there are convictions, and that people that are actually convicted, that this information is actually out there in the public. Because for most people, the figures we have tonight may be the first time they're actually seeing those figures. But beyond that is also to see what exactly and what is the drive towards that fight for the fight against corruption. So you look at the pillar of public engagement and look at the principle of mainstreaming the principles of anti-corruption at the national level and subnational level for issues of public administration and even service delivery. And if citizens, each time they engage state institutions, do not do not see service delivery as being provided to them. If people each time they engage public administrations do not even receive the kinds of service they wish to receive, they would never appreciate the fight against corruption. Because what is corruption to the ordinary man in the street, to the ordinary citizen, the ordinary woman in the street, is the fact that each time I need services delivered to me, it is delivered. That each time I go to make complaints at different institutions, my complaints are addressed. That each time I turn on power, I see power common, because at the heart of underdevelopment and the economic challenges that we have is corruption itself. So if we do not see, any level of development in the economy, if we do not see improvement in security, if we do not see improvement in service delivery, we would not appreciate the fight against corruption.
Let me put you on pause, Cynthia.
Let me put you on pause, Cynthia. Then the question will be, what happens to this category of persons?
And go to Femi Additional. Let me put you on pause, Cynthia. I'm sorry for butting in, but let me go to Femi Additional. Now, there are some cases that have kind of tainted what should have been an obvious battle against corruption. And sometimes those cases have brought about the perception problem that the battle seems to have. There's general analysis that if you fight corruption with corrupt methods, then you yourself are encouraging corruption. Some of the officials at various agencies which are supposed to be cooperating in the battle against corruption are in fact stymieing it. So you have a case where certain operatives in the DSS are preventing the EFCC from arresting its former Director General. And that almost degenerated into a shootout. I use that just as an example. That happened quite a while back. But between then and now, what has government done to improve the mechanics of cooperation between its anti-corruption agencies so that, one, they are not working at cross purposes, and two, they are focused on the big issues?
Thank you. I'd like to agree with Mr. Wahab Shitu that the big elephant in the room is corruption. It's not power. It's not the economy, it's not infrastructure, because if you sort out the issue of corruption, all those other issues will be sorted out. So in Nigeria, the elephant in the room is corruption. Now, in terms of cooperation, the analogy you gave may not quite be opposite when we talk about the corruption war, because the DSS is not involved in the corruption war. It is about national security. And your specific question is, how do you get the agencies to work together? The agencies involved in anti-corruption are the EFCC, the ICPC, Code of Conduct Bureau, the police to an extent. I have not seen them working at cross purposes. That's why I said that analogy may not be quite correct, because the agencies battling corruption, as far as I'm concerned, have a synergy.
How about the presidential panel, the special presidential panel on the recovery of public property, which some of those it has gone after have taken to court, and the court has said it has absolutely no authority to go after them?
Well, it depends on the terms of reference that that panel has. When the panel was set up, it must have been given terms of reference. If it works within its terms of reference, then the work will be legitimate. But then if a court has made a pronouncement, the next thing to do is to try to vacate that pronouncement, because the war must be fought within the ambit of the law.
All right, let me come back to Lagos and ask you, Haji, I'm sure you've been listening to this whole conversation from Mr. Shitu there to even Femi Additional. What's your assessment? Because there seem to be two different perspectives in the room. Those who feel everything has been perfectly done, and those who feel no, there are ways in which this thing is being prosecuted that are not correct.
Thanks so much. Like I've always been telling people, Rome was not built in a day. We have to start from somewhere. That's what I always tell people. Thank God we've started from somewhere, and we can always move forward. If we have a particular set of people being investigated today, I'm sure the table will turn. it will come to the other side too. But we really need to start from somewhere. And I always say, for those of us as citizens, we, in most cases, we don't usually help the marcher. When these issues crop up, we tend to see tribal sentiment. That's when we tend to bring religious sentiment and all whatnot. And these will not help us in any way. When these people are corruptly enriching themselves, they don't remember tribes, they don't remember religion, they don't care from which clan you are or from which sector of, they don't bloody care. So when we are fighting them...
Sorry, you just have to mind your language on the show. Yes, thank you.
When we are fighting them, we don't need to bring all these issues. It's just to divert people's attention. We really need to face the issue headlong. As Nigerian citizens, we must know the fact that corruption is affecting every facet of the economy. That's why our health sector is not working. That's why education is where it is today. As a way forward, I want to see Nigerian citizens, and I always tell people, especially as media practitioners, we also have a great role to play in fighting corruption. When we take the police, we take the lawyers, then come and take journalists. Yes. We are the ones setting agenda. If we want a particular topic to be armed on for like 3 months now, we have a way we do that. God has, it's even a constitutional power as the watchdog of the society, as the conscience of the society. However, how far have we been able to play this role of being the watchdog and being the conscience of the society is a big question. For us as citizens, how many of us have actually said, we are moving a motion to remove this, my representative as House of Rep or House of Assembly because so-so person is involved.
You know, that was actually tried some time ago, but you found that the bureaucracy attached to even removing your rep is not something you can do in a day or two.
But man, when we are really ready, when we really want to do this, we can get it done.
While we are getting ready to do it, while we are getting ready to do it,
that we should go back to the group captain.
Exactly.
We are coming. We will talk about it too. Simply,
and we're not dodging because we are media practitioners.
No,
that's the other thing that is being said.
Simply because when we were reading out the list of statistics, we also had senior military personnel on that list. And I'm not putting you on the spot or anything, Group Captain Iheanacho, just to ask you from your perspective, what can be done, you know, to make the job of anti-corruption agencies a bit lighter?
Especially given the fact that very often you don't find it as easy to go after very senior military personnel the way you can just pick up a Yahoo boy or a civilian, even if he was a minister and so on. It's a different ballgame when you're talking about senior military personnel.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to share my views on this. I think, everybody agrees, corruption is like the elephant in a china shop and need to be reined in or contained, as it were. However, I think we appear to have gone into this anti-corruption drive without necessarily adequately preparing the legal framework or carrying the generality of Nigerians along. And that is why this perception thing, some people begin to look at, you pick up a man who is corrupt, you say, because he's from my part of the country, we speak the same language, or my own, even bringing in religion and all unnecessary sentiments into what otherwise should be an offensive situation to everybody. And I would think that if ab initio, the National Assembly were made to enact laws specifically for the anti-corruption drive, it will go a long way. It will have a lot more people will buy into it, and people will not see it as selective because the ceilings and floors have been defined prior to launching the drive. Again, it is the government has done very well indeed, but there is quite a lot still to be done. We need to make people understand, perhaps even having the corruption put in a definitional context, because people look at anti-graft corruption as just going to take money. But I look beyond that. I look at even weak institutions, policies, or even justice system or injustice, as it were. They are even bigger than the corruption of going after somebody who have just taken money. If, say, for example, I'm tasked with doing my job as a law enforcement agent, I see what ought to be done. I look the other way around. It's not about money, it's also corruption. So we can go on and on. I know time and space will not permit all that. So if such is done, going after the senior military officers or who are in the security agencies when they are corrupt becomes easier. And they will be subjected to the law just like every other person. Nobody is shielded. As a matter of fact, even in the military itself, within the system, they have a very strong...
I'm going to have to interrupt you simply because we're pressed for time, and it's a town hall, so we do have to incorporate our audience. And when you were speaking there, talking about the gains of the administration, there was some rumbling and mumbling in the room. So we would like to give you an opportunity to ask your question. Thank you very much. If you just step to the microphone to ask your question. Yes, at the back there. Thank you very much. Just identify yourself or introduce yourself, I mean to say.
Who's next after that?
If it's a question or a comment.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Go on. Thank you.
Good evening. This is Yomi Akishola. I actually feel that my question goes to the woman from the journalist. Nawaj. That is there a way that you can help galvanize the agenda setting that will help us face this issue of corruption? Like, all of us will look at it, it's a demon. We've got to fight it. We have to win it.
Thank you.
You respond at the end here.
Thank you very much. I remain Comrade Ibrahim Walama from the Construction Union, the General Secretary.
Okay.
Mine is an intervention, perhaps to share an opinion too, and some questions.
I hope it's not too long.
Well, not much.
Yes, not much can be...
Is it directed to anyone?
Is it directed to anyone so the person can listen?
Of course.
Who is that? Who is it directed to?
Almost all of them. From the media.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Please go on.
Coming to
you have a minute.
Main issue, I want to agree in total that corruption is the big elephant in the house. Now, looking at it from this point, we have infrastructural deficit, and the reasons are not far-fetched, some of which has to do with our system, contract our system, the procurement system, and what have you. The process is marred with a lot of corruption, and that, I think, some of us know. Now, talking about tax regime, the Comrade President of NLC rightly said that the workers pay religiously tax, but the few privileged, they don't even pay tax at all in some cases. If they pay nothing compared to their income. Now, looking at the issue of the salary or minimum wage paid to a worker, now, 18,000 was the minimum wage before now, compared to the exchange rate, what it is to $1 in 2011. Now it is 30,000. What is 30,000 to $1? We're talking of corruption. There must be a living wage if we have to eradicate corruption.
I'm going to have to put you on pause there. Your time is through, sir. Madam, yes, please.
Uju Honor, Uju Civil Society. My comment is actually, we say that the money that we've been recovered from corruption, that we have them lying in CBN, why do we have to, for how long are we going to leave this money lying in CBN when we have a lot of infrastructures to work on? Then,
that will be a question for you, Mr. Shitu, and for you, Mr. Adeshino.
Then Madam said that the corruption, we Nigerians, we feel that the fight for corruption is one-sided. That if you're in support of the government, you have a soft landing, like the guest and host stage. And that is how we feel about the fight for corruption in the country. And Madam also said that the table will turn around. Why do we have to wait for it to be one-sided and keep waiting for the table to turn around? Why don't we balance the fight for corruption so that it goes around everybody?
Thank you very much.
You want to clap? I saw somebody trying to clap.
That's a fair question. Now, Mr. Adeshino, I'm going to start with you. why should the money, I mean, I know Mr. Shito has mentioned the fact that not all that money is the government yet. There are some legal obstacles, but the ones that have been finally forfeited, which means that they are free of all legal encumbrances. Where I'm wrong, Mr. Shito, please correct me. Why should we leave those ones in the central bank? Or to use the phrase, lying in the central bank?
When we need to fix roads.
When we are fixing roads and so on, why do we have to wait?
Warehouse them there.
But that is not quite the situation, because the funds that are free of any form of encumbrances have actually been put in the budget. The budget of 2018, you had a section under it which came, it was captioned recoveries, and it was used for the social investment program. That money came from recoveries from anti-corruption. So it's not every money, and Mr. Shito didn't mean that every money was in the CBN.
I was just trying to say, Mr. Additional, that information is lacking. Perhaps you need to give more information about what you're doing, because this question has been there, and we're just hearing for the first time.
No.
Yeah.
Not exactly, because at times some people just select what they want to hear. Right on this station last year, when it was an issue, I spoke on it. Minister of Information spoke on it. That money was used for the social investment program. But at times, some people just choose what they want to listen to, and the others they discard.
All right, Mr. Adesha, let me come to Hajia Sekinat, and I'm going to give you 1 minute because we're now completely out of time. To answer the
Your question was how we can set the agenda.
Yes, as media.
That we can do. By insisting, we have various means where corruption comes in. As media practitioners, we make it a point of view in our various programs, in our write-ups, various articles. We put it should be the topic of discussion. Why our politicians should not be earning what they are earning right now. Why the citizens have to fight against maybe a governor that has just finished serving, is now in the Senate, should not be earning, you know. You have all manners of pay there, pay there. As a matter of fact, if we can reduce that, that will bring down the level of crimes and all what's not during electioneering processes that we are having now.
Let me put you on pause, Elijah. Let me put you on pause. There's another journalist on the panel.
Yeah, you wanted to say something.
Yes. I think the point to just make is that nothing is new. All of these things we are complaining about have been with us. Go and read the Daily Times of 1972. Read the editorials they wrote. Look at the captions they had. All those types. These are the same issues that are being reinvented, repackaged, and relaunched on us. It's true. Because nothing is absolutely new. All of these things we have seen before. Yes, didn't we have a Minister of Finance that was living a very flamboyant life? And that we knew of it. Now, coming to the issue of governance, all these ideas, do these politicians, do they even read? Do they even read the things we write? Many of them don't read. They are so concerned with how they will line their pockets and swell their bank accounts. And
let me put you on pause because we're completely running out of time. Wow. I'm going to give a minute to Cynthia and Captain, 1 minute each. Your final comments on this segment.
Well, the fight against corruption, one, to be successful, we need to see more transparency in that fight against corruption. We also need to see the strengthening of institutional and legal framework, and that includes beyond just the institutions itself, but the legislative arm of government. We need to see a more strict anti-corruption agenda for the Ninth Assembly, and that includes reviewing its oversight function to ensure that it keeps the executive in check. Then the other is also the engagement with citizens. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done from the arms from citizens in ensuring that we provide that independent oversight on the fight against corruption.
Hear us. Your 1 minute starts now.
Yes, I want to see a situation where the processes of fighting corruption is made seamless. I want to see a situation where with the Nigerians and all, we be made to understand that corruption is not just mere chasing money, but those institutions that our institutions have to be strengthened so that we do not give gaps and openings for corrupt practices. to me, those are great things that we can do.
Thank you very much.
In advancing
Thank you very much, Captain Iheanacho. Let me use this opportunity to thank all our guests on this segment, Haja Sekinat Lawal, Mr. Wahab Shitu, Mr. Eddie Odibiri, Captain Iheanacho, Mr. Femi Additional. You deserve double thanks because you participated in 2 different segments.
That's right. And then
thank you. Yes, and Cynthia Mbamalu, thank you very much from Yaga. Let us also thank our audience who have been with us all through this segment. We want to thank our viewers at home as well.
Oh, sorry, Ladia, just to say that our coverage tomorrow starts very early in the morning, about 7.
Indeed, about 7.
And so stick with Channels Television. We're covering every aspect of the inauguration for you tomorrow, live here on all our platforms.
But we've just got enough time to say thank you for being with us. Let's go and continue setting the agenda for the new administration as it takes office tomorrow. Ijoma and I.
Yeah, we're signing out for now. See you tomorrow.
Indeed, see you tomorrow. Good night.
Everybody love me when I do what I do. Cause when I come through, I got the power of cool.